It is said that some stories do not begin with a trumpet of history, but with a small flame, shivering in the presence of what it is about to reveal. In a forgotten chamber of stone, where the air tastes of dust and old breath, a single lamp trembles over a worn scroll. The flame leans, then steadies, then leans again, as if the light itself is afraid to wake what sleeps inside the ink. The parchment is thin with age, its edges frayed like quiet waves. Across its surface, symbols gather in patient lines. Spirals, star marks, oceanic curves. Not quite a map, not quite a prayer, but something suspended between the two. Whispers tell us that this is how Atlantis first entered the world we know, not as a place you could point to with certainty, but as a name carried like secret. In the mouth of time, Atlantis, a word that does not land like stone, but drifts like mist, a name that seems to echo even when spoken softly, as though it has been waiting in the dark for a listener. And so the story begins, not with the ocean's roar, but with silence. A silence broken only by the lamp's faint crackle and the slow turning of the scroll beneath careful hands that are not seen, but felt, as you feel a presence in a room, even when it does not move. Some believe the first keepers of this tale were not conquerors, not poets hungry for applause, but quiet witnesses, scribes, priests, travelers, minds trained to hold what is sacred, without shaking it too hard. They did not shout the story into the world. They passed it, one breath to another, one chamber to another, one era to the next, like a bowl of water carried through a crowded hall, steady hands attempting not to spill. The delicate reflection of the sky. Beneath the silence, the tale took on its first shape, not fixed, never fixed, but held as a relic is held, with reverence and restraint. Each keeper added something without meaning to. Not necessarily a lie, but a shadow, a soft edge where memory meets imagination, where human longing begins to color the ink. And perhaps that is why the origin of Atlantis is so haunting, because from the very beginning, myth and memory lean toward one another, indistinguishable in the dim. We want a clear doorway. We want a date, a shoreline, a coordinate. But the first form of Atlantis arrives as a hush, a grand civilization described with tender precision, yet offered to us only through fragile testimony. This is the contradiction that moves like a slow tide beneath the chapter. How can a city be spoken of with such detail and still remain unreachable? How can something so vast be held only in a handful of words? It is said that the account was preserved, not because it was easy to believe, but because it was difficult to forget, as if the story carried a warning that did not rust with time, a warning about power, about pride, about the way even shining things can sink, when the weight of their own certainty becomes too heavy. Yet even that feels too sharp, too final, for a story that comes to us in candlelight and dust. So we return to the chamber, to the lamp, to the scroll. We listen not for answers, but for the tone of the telling, the way the words seem to walk barefoot, the way they avoid declaring too much. In forgotten corners of the earth, temples once kept records behind gates, not to hoard them with cruelty, but to protect them from careless eyes, because some knowledge, they believed, could bruise the mind if carried too quickly. Atlantis feels like that, not a puzzle meant to be solved in daylight, but a relic meant to be approached in twilight, slowly, gently, as if the truth within it might startle and vanish. The ocean is not seen yet, only felt, a distant pulse beyond a veil, a low pressure in the chest. When a name is spoken, a sensation like holding a shell to the ear, and hearing a sea you cannot touch. And perhaps this is the deeper mystery of the beginning. Not where was Atlantis, but why did this story survive? What did it ask humans to remember, so quietly and so insistently, that it slipped through centuries like water through stone? Some believe the tale endured because it was never meant to be proven, only carried, only held, like a candle passed from one pilgrim to the next, not to light the whole world, but to keep a single sacred flame alive, against the darkness. And as the lamp continues to tremble above the scroll, The ink seems to darken, then soften, as if the letters are breathing. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to remain a shoreline in the mind, a city made of echo and starlight, buried under the patient mercy of the sea. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and in the hush before sleep, with the world growing distant, Atlantis does not demand belief. It only whispers, softly, steadily, from the place where the story began. It is said that there are chambers beneath the world, where words do not simply sound, they linger. A cool chamber of stone, shaped like a deep jar, where every whisper returns to you, as if the air is remembering. Here, torchlight does not dance wildly. It moves slowly, like breath and sleep. It grazes the walls and reveals what time has tucked away. Spirals carved into thresholds, star marks pressed into tablets, and dust that floats as patiently as snowfall. Whispers tell us this is where the story of Atlantis was received, not in bright markets or crowded streets, but in quiet places, where knowledge is handled like a sacred vessel. In the center of the chamber rests a slab of stone, worn smooth by attention. Upon it, an old tablet waits in silence, marked with a small symbol, a star above a wave, as if the sky and the sea once signed the same name. And beyond, half lost in shadow, stands a single figure, not human, not living, but watchful, a hooded sentinel of oxidized bronze, faceless and still, as if carved to guard not treasure, but restraint. Beneath the silence, a tale is carried forward. Some believe it began with an old traveler, not a hero, not a conqueror, but a bearer of words. He arrived with the smell of papyrus and night upon him, with sand in the folds of his cloak, and salt in the corners of his memory. He did not speak quickly. He did not speak to impress. He stood before priests in a sacred hall, where scrolls were tied with rope, sealed with clay, and placed behind gates of bronze and stone. It is said the records were kept behind such gates, not out of greed, but out of caution, because there are truths, some believed, that can unsettle a mind, the way sudden light unsettles the eyes. And so knowledge was offered sparingly, rationed like water in a dry season, measured like incense, released only when the air felt ready to hold it. The traveler spoke of distant temples, of elders who did not measure history in years, but in starlight, and in flood marks carved into sacred walls. In forgotten corners of the earth, some walls bear faint lines, not cracks, not decoration, but waterlines, marks left by a sea that once rose higher than memory. Beside each line, small symbols, a spiral, a star, a careful glyph, as if the ocean had written its own scripture, and the temple had chosen to keep it. This is the chain of custody, the long, delicate passage of the Atlantis tale, from temple to temple, from mouth to ear, from breath to breath, and the chamber listens, because there is a gentle wonder in such a lineage, the idea the story could survive, through centuries of sand and shifting empires, simply because careful hands kept carrying it. Yet melancholy arrives, quietly, like cool air seeping under a door, for what is carried by humans is never carried untouched. Some believe that memory is a sacred bowl, but even sacred bowls can tilt. Reverence can bend a retelling toward holiness. Pride can polish details until they shine too brightly. Longing can add softness where the truth was sharp. And fear can remove what should have remained. A soft contradiction glimmers here, like torchlight reflecting on still water. The story feels ancient and exact, and yet it depends upon something fragile. The trustworthiness of recall. A name spoken one night, remembered another morning. A detail recited in ritual, repeated until it becomes smooth with repetition. A sentence passed forward, until it is no longer the same sentence. That began the journey. Whispers tell us that even the official version may be its own veil, a ceremonial robe of language, draped carefully over something simpler beneath, a truth that could not be shown plainly, without changing the world of the listener. In the chamber, symbols gather like quiet witnesses, a carved timeline, stone grooves that mark the passing of ages, as patiently as a river marks a canyon. star charts etched into walls, constellations mapped not merely for navigation, but for meaning, as if the sky itself was a ledger, and a basin of water, still as held breath, reflecting torchlight like a second sky. If you lean close, the reflections tremble, and for a moment, it seems as though the water remembers what the stone refuses to say aloud. Perhaps the most often told version is not the fullest truth. Perhaps it is the version most carefully chosen, trimmed, polished, measured, so it could be carried safely through minds that might not survive the weight of the unfiltered tale. And so, in this cool chamber, the traveler's words settle into the air and become part of the wall, part of the dust, part of the silence. The priests do not shout the ending. They do not stamp certainty onto the scroll. They close the gate of records again, and the bronze lattice catches the last torchlight, like a fading constellation, because some believe that silence, too, is a kind of record, a blank space left intentionally, a pause shaped like reverence, a refusal to name what should remain veiled. And as the chamber returns to its calm, the echoes soften, the torchlight lowers, and the basin holds its second sky without stirring. Perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be held in proof. Perhaps it was meant to be held in careful telling, a story carried forward, not to be solved, but to be remembered, marked by the moon, kept behind gates, rationed like sacred water. And as sleep approaches, the most often told version lingers, not as an answer, but as a hush, reminding us that what survives longest is not always what is loudest, but what is guarded by the gentlest silence. It is said that every world has its boundary, a place where the familiar loosens its grip and the unnamed begins to breathe. Tonight, we come to such a threshold, marked by the moon. Two towering stones rise from a narrow strait at the edge of the known waters. They stand like solemn guardians, weathered by salt, scarred by wind, their faces carved with spirals and star marks, so faint they seem less like decoration and more like old vows, pressed into stone. Between them, the sea passes in silence, not the lively, talkative sea of harbors and nets, but a darker water, a water that listens. Beneath the silence, the horizon opens wide, and the world seems to exhale. Whispers tell us that sailors once approached this place with the caution of pilgrims, not because the stones were hostile, but because they felt aware, as if the pillars were not merely monuments, but gates. And beyond gates, there are always stories. Some believe these stones were the last markers, before maps became uncertain, before coastlines ended in blankness, before the sea began to write in mist. Here, the water changes its voice. It becomes deeper, heavier, as though it carries more than salt, as though it carries names. The chapter moves like a slow voyage now, not with speed, but with the gentle rhythm of oars. Imagine the sound, with meeting water, water yielding and returning, a soft creak from the boat's ribs, as if it is breathing with the waves. No human hand is seen, only the suggestion of passage, a vessel drifting under moonlight, guided by a line of stars, and the quiet instinct to go farther than comfort allows. The horizon remains distant, always withholding, not because it is cruel, but because distance is part of the ritual. For Atlantis, it is said, was always placed beyond the pillars, beyond the last sure shoreline, beyond the place where language begins to hesitate, as if the mind required a curtain to accept the grandeur of what it was being asked to imagine, a city not merely lost, but removed, set behind a veil of water and myth, so it could remain untouched by ordinary doubt. In forgotten corners of the earth, merchants whispered of such things. Rumors arrived folded in side trade routes, like secret notes tucked into amphory. Sailors spoke of distant lights, seen where no land should be, a faint glow on the rim of the world, that vanished when chased. Some believe these were only tricks of fog, or starlight tangled in sea spray. Yet the whispers endured, because whispers are stubborn. They linger in taverns, in shrines, in the quiet moment before sleep, when the mind grows soft enough to consider what daylight dismisses. And so, Atlantis became more than a place. It became a direction, a gesture toward emptiness, a sentence that begins with certainty and ends in mist. Here is the gentle contradiction that glimmers like moonlight on black water. If Atlantis was so great, so ordered, so radiant with rings of stone and sacred metal, why is it reached only through a phrase, beyond the pillars? As if the path to it is not a road, but an idea. As if the sea itself has agreed to keep the coordinates blurred. Beneath the silence, we feel what sailors may have felt, that beyond the threshold, the ocean does not simply stretch wider. It changes. It becomes a keeper, a vast, breathing archive that erases footsteps. A wake appears behind a passing vessel, and then it is gone, smoothed away as if it never existed. The sea does not preserve tracks. It swallows them, and in that swallowing, there is something almost tender, a mercy that hides what cannot be carried safely back into the ordinary world. Whispers tell us that currents beyond the pillars carry more than water. They carry erased names, broken vows, and the faint shimmer of forbidden knowledge. Truths too heavy for shallow minds, memories too bright for unprepared eyes. Some believe the pillars were not placed to keep humans out, but to mark where humans must choose. To go farther is to accept uncertainty, to accept that not everything is meant to return. With proof in hand, the boat drifts, the oars slow, the horizon remains a veil, and somewhere beneath the dark expanse, something sleeps. Not necessarily a city of stone alone, but a story held in the ocean's chest, like a long, unspoken breath. At last, we do not rush toward an ending. We simply listen. The water inhales. The water exhales. The pillars stand behind us like a closed gate, and the sea opens ahead, like a vast, quiet chamber. Perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be found by those who demand certainty. Perhaps it waits only in the place beyond the boundary, where memory fades, where the mind becomes gentle, and where the ocean refuses to return what it has chosen to keep. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, beyond the pillars, the sea breathes in the dark, as if guarding something sacred, just beneath the waves. It is said that some cities are not built. They are arranged, not only with stone and labor, but with intention, with rhythm, with a geometry that feels as though it was listened into existence, rather than forced. Tonight, we begin with an aerial dream. High above the dark water, beneath a sky washed in starlight, a pattern appears, concentric circles glimmering as if the sea itself has opened an eye. Rings of land, rings of water, a city shaped like a ritual. The canals lie dark and still, reflecting the heavens like polished obsidian. The ring walls catch faint torchlight, and their curves seem to turn slowly, not in motion, but in meaning, like a wheel drawn in silence. Whispers tell us this is the form Atlantis took, in the version that lingers strongest in the mind. Not merely a kingdom, but a design. And the design is the mystery, because ordinary cities stretch outward like spilled grain. They follow rivers. They cling to hills. They grow where trade and hunger lead them. But Atlantis, it is said, was different. It was measured. It was ringed, as if patient hands, guided by celestial rhythm, carved it into the world the way one carves a sacred symbol into wax. Slowly, carefully, knowing that every curve must align with something unseen above. Beneath the silence, we drift downward. We cross the first boundary, a circular wall rising from the water, its stone fitted so precisely that even shadow seems to respect the seam. A bridge arches over a canal. No voices, no crowds, only the soft sound of water, moving through hidden channels, and the distant, gentle creak of wood. Somewhere out of sight, as if the city still remembers boats, we approach a gate, a round mouth of stone, engraved with spirals and star marks. Torchlight burns in recesses, but the flame feels restrained, as though it has been instructed to glow softly, so it will not disturb what is sacred. And beyond the gate, a corridor swallows lamplight. The darkness inside is not empty. It is full. Full of hush. Full of old air. Full of the feeling that someone once walked here. With steady purpose. Some believe the rings were more than defense. More than beauty. More than the pride of engineers. They believe the rings were symbolic. A mirror of the cosmos. A city arranged like the sky. Circles within circles. Paths turning inward. As if the people of Atlantis wished to live. Inside a living diagram of the universe. A wheel of power turning in silence. We move deeper. The second ring opens into gardens. Not wild, not loud, but disciplined and serene. Stone planters, softened by moss. Fountains whose water does not leap, but trickles, with the patience of time. Moonlight falls into the canals, and the water holds it, as though it were holding breath. We walk across another bridge, and the reflections below shift, not because of wind, but because the city's unseen channels keep the water gently moving, like veins beneath skin. Here the emotional journey begins to change. At first there's only awe, calm, reverent wonder, because the rings feel perfect. Not perfect like a boast, but perfect like a spell. And spells, as some believe, always demand a price. A quiet unease arrives, soft as fog, for perfection can be intoxicating. It can invite those who live within it to believe they have escaped the ordinary laws of the world, the laws of decay, of humility, of limits. The city's curves are so precise, they begin to feel unreal, as if no human hand could have shaped them, without guidance from something beyond human. And here, the contradiction hums beneath everything, like distant thunder under the sea. Did such a place truly exist? Or is this ringed vision a story engine? A luminous design crafted to hypnotize the listener into belief? Because the mind loves circles. The mind trusts symmetry. The mind sees a sacred pattern, and assumes there must be a sacred origin. It is said that storytellers understand this. Priests understand this. Those who keep records behind gates understand this. A circle feels eternal. A circle feels ordained. And so Atlantis is remembered as circles, as though its very shape was meant to convince us it was real. We linger on details that feel both precise and dreamlike. Walls that gleam faintly with faded copper hues. Doorways that drink lamplight and give back only shadow. A sacred hall with a floor mosaic is a cosmic wheel. Stars embedded in stone. Spirals flowing inward. Water channels tracing unseen rings beneath. Some believe the city's heartbeat moved through those channels. A soft thunder of distant water, traveling underfoot, keeping the whole design alive. And then, slowly, the dream begins to lift. The aerial view returns. The rings are seen from above again. Perfect circles on dark water, like ripples that never stop expanding. But now mist begins to gather. A veil rolls across the canals, softening edges, blurring lines. The ring walls fade. The bridges become faint suggestions. The gates become shadows. And the city becomes what it has always been, in the deepest part of the mind. A pattern held by the sea. Perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be found, as a ruin you can touch. Perhaps it was meant to be remembered, as a design, a sacred geometry lingering just beyond certainty, like a constellation reflected in water. Where memory fades, the rings remain, not in stone, but in silence. And as sleep approaches, the last thing we see is the faint circle of the city, dissolving beneath mist, as though the ocean itself is carefully closing its hand around what it refuses to return. It is said that deep beneath certain hills, the earth does not only hold stone, it holds whispers. Tonight we enter a dim forge, where heat does not roar. It sighs. The chamber is carved from blackened rock, its walls stained with old smoke, its floor dusted with ash that has settled for centuries. As quietly as snowfall, a low fire breathes in the hearth. Embers glow like sleeping eyes, and in the half-light, something shines. Not bright, not harsh, but warm, like a captured sunset, pressed into metal. Orichalcum, a name that feels like a spell on the tongue, a word spoken in ancient texts, with the calm confidence of those who believed they were describing something real. Yet the glow before us seems unreal, neither fully gold nor fully flame, as if the earth exhaled a secret into human hands, and then refused to explain it. Whispers tell us this substance was precious, beyond ordinary measure, second only to gold, some said, and in certain halls of Atlantis, more admired than gold, because it carried a color that felt alive. Red gold, not the pale brightness of daylight wealth, but the warm hue of dusk, the last light before night claims everything. Beneath the silence, the forge teaches us something. This is not a chapter about chemistry. It is about temptation. It is about the way humans have always been drawn to what glimmers softly in darkness, as if it has its own breath. Some believe orichalcum was a true metal, a rare alloy pulled from the depths and refined with patient skill. Perhaps it was mined where seawater met stone, where mineral veins ran like hidden rivers. Perhaps it was melted and poured into ingots stamped with star marks, then weighed on bronze scales, with hands so steady they seemed to belong to priests as much as to smiths. We do not see those hands tonight. We only see what remains. A scale on a stone table, its pans holding fragments of red gold light, a dusting of fine powder, metal dust, that catches torchlight and becomes a faint constellation. A sealed scroll case nearby, its clay stamp marked with a spiral, as if knowledge and metal were kept together, under the same vow. In forgotten corners of the earth, wealth has always tried to become sacred, so we drift beyond the forge, into the imagined halls where orichalcum was displayed, as more than treasure, as identity. Walls plated in warm gleam, panels of red gold set against sandstone, so the whole corridor seemed to glow, like a perpetual sunset. And at the center, a temple threshold, lined with orichalcum bands, catching starlight and turning it soft and red, as though even the moon could be made to bow to the city's radiance. Marked by the moon, the metal does not glitter sharply. It hums, and in that hum, a subtle danger appears, because what is beautiful does not only attract admiration, it attracts hunger. Whispers tell us that orichalcum became an emblem, not simply of wealth, but of the sacred temptation to adorn power, to wrap authority in shining skin, until it feels untouchable, until the city begins to believe it is ordained to outshine others, perhaps even to outshine the gods. And here, contradiction enters, like a cool breeze through a warm hall. This metal is spoken of with confidence, yet its true nature remains hidden, lost, disputed, half-myth. Across centuries, scholars and seekers have tried to name it, to match it to something known, a copper alloy, a rare blend, a forgotten technique. Yet the certainty keeps slipping away, like water through fingers. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps orichalcum was never meant to be identified in daylight. Perhaps it was always meant to hover between truth and symbol, a poetic mask for something rarer than metal, knowledge, authority, the intoxicating belief that civilization can shape the world into a mirror of its own greatness. Beneath the silence, the listener may feel it, the gentle warning hidden inside the glow. For what glitters most beautifully often draws the deepest shadows, not because the glow is evil, but because humans, when surrounded by radiance, sometimes forget humility. They begin to worship what they made. They begin to trust their own shine more than the quiet laws of the sea and the sky. And so the warmth of wonder turns slowly toward unease. Not loud, not dramatic, just a slight shift, like the moment you realize a beautiful object has begun to own you. We return to the forge. The fire lowers. The chamber grows cooler. The embers fade from bright red to a softer, dimmer breath. The orichalcum ingot on the anvil still glows, but now the light is less certain, as if it is deciding whether to remain in this world. And as the metal cools, a question lingers in the air, like the last warmth from a dying flame. Did Atlantis vanish because it was punished, or because it became too enamored with its own radiance? Perhaps it was never meant to be solved. Perhaps it was meant to be felt as a lingering heat in the dark, a red gold breath, exhaled by the earth, and remembered by the sea. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, as the forge falls quiet, the glow dims gently, leaving behind not certainty, but the soft, sacred uncertainty that carries us toward sleep. It is said that there are places the sea does not merely touch, it listens to them. Tonight, a sacred hill rises above quiet water, and at its crown, a temple waits. Its silhouette is carved against the night like a vow, a dark shape under starlight, still and solemn, as though it has been holding its breath since the first stone was set. Marked by the moon, the path upward is pale. Steps are worn smooth by time, their edges softened, their faces etched with faint spirals, and star marks that glimmer only when the light is gentle. The air smells of salt and incense. Salt from the open water below. Incense from old burners resting on stone altars. Their ash settled like gray snow, in small sacred drifts, and the sea answers every prayer with a soft, repeating breath. In, out, in, out. Beneath the silence, we enter the threshold. Columns rise in a long colonnade, sandstone pillars catching moonlight, as if the night itself is pouring silver down their faces. Between them, shadows stand like quiet attendants. At the far end, a presence watches, a hooded figure of oxidized bronze, faceless and still, a sentinel shaped not for battle, but for restraint. No human voices live here now, only the hush of stone, the slow drift of dust, and the distant hymn of water. Whispers tell us this was the heart of Atlantis, its central sanctuary, dedicated not to the sun, not to the mountain, but to a sea-born power, a deity of depth, of tides, of hidden corridors beneath the world. And in this choice, to anchor worship in the ocean, something is revealed about the Atlantean soul. A civilization does not choose its deity lightly. To kneel before the sea is to kneel before what cannot be owned, before what cannot be fully seen, before what returns nothing on command. It is to accept that mystery is not a flaw. It is the foundation. We move with meditative pacing now, as if our footsteps are not allowed to be loud. We pass through chambers where offerings rest, like sleeping birds, small bowls placed carefully on low platforms, folded linen untouched, carved figurines with worn faces, spiral shells arranged beside sealed scrolls, as if the ocean and language were always meant to sit together. The offerings do not feel abandoned. They feel preserved, as though the temple itself has been waiting for the return of hands that once brought these gifts with reverence. In the inner sanctum, silence grows thick, thick enough to touch. A circular doorway leads inward, and beyond it, the air is hazy, the darkness deep, the stone cool with the memory of water. A single shaft of moonlight falls through a crack above, and lands on a spiral carved into the floor, as if the sky is pointing to a secret. Here, myth and memory mingle. We remember what is said, that Atlantis was a city of rings, a wheel of stone and water, and that at its center, this sanctuary stood, the still point around which the whole design turned. Some believe the temple was a mirror of the Atlantean spirit, disciplined, ceremonial, and quietly hungry for greatness. Not hungry in the way of shouting conquest, but hungry in the way of polished halls, perfect rituals, and the longing to feel chosen by forces older than any crown. Yet contradiction arrives softly, like cool air slipping through warm torchlight. This temple is described with reverence, but known only through words, as if the building itself never stood anywhere except in the mind's illuminated chamber. How can we walk through its columns so clearly and still not know if they ever rose from the earth? How can we smell incense in our imagination and still have no ash to hold in our hands? Whispers tell us this is the strange power of sacred stories. They build structures inside us, and those structures feel real because the soul recognizes the shape. We linger on symbols now. A circle of oath stones in a courtyard, each stone engraved with spirals and stars, as if promises were meant to be bound to celestial law. A cracked bowl sculpture nearby, its powerful form softened by age, reminding us of ritual strength, not wild but contained. And in a sacred hall, a basin of water sits beneath torchlight. Small flames burn low in bronze bowls around it, controlled and steady. Their reflections scatter across the surface, like trapped constellations, stars beneath water, fire held in silence. The sea-born deity is not shown as a face, but as a relief emerging from waves, a form both present and veiled, as if even the gods here prefer not to be fully seen. And then, slowly, the temple begins to darken. One torch goes out, then another. The smoke rises in thin, quiet threads, like prayers dissolving into the night. The steps outside grow dim. The colonnade loses its silver edge. The offerings vanish into shadow, until only starlight remains, and the oceans low and below. In, out, and in that final stillness, the temple feels less like a building, and more like a question. The world has not finished asking. Perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be found, as stone and ruin. Perhaps the temple under starlight exists where sacred things often exist, in the space between myth and memory, where the mind grows quiet enough to let mystery remain. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, with the last light extinguished, the sea continues its soft, repeating breath, as if it is both worshipper and judge, and the temple, whether real or imagined, rests once more beneath the stars. It is said that power, when it wishes to appear sacred, learns to speak softly. Tonight, we enter a chamber shaped like a circle, a place of formal hush, where sound seems to bow before stone. 10 thrones wait in the dim, arranged in a perfect ring, not a line of conquest, not a parade of dominance, but a circle, as if rule must return to itself, again and again, to remain balanced. Each throne is carved from pale sandstone, its arms engraved with spirals and star marks, its seat worn smooth, as though many silent nights have pressed themselves into the stone. At the center of the circle, a low fire burns, not a roaring blaze, but a quiet flame, controlled, measured, breathing like a living thing that has been trained to remain calm. Beneath the silence, the fire seems to write, without ink. Its light touches the thrones, touches the carved floor, mosaic beneath them, and turns the chamber into a slow-moving ritual of shadow and glow. Whispers tell us this was the governance of Atlantis, the rumored order of kings, bound not only by bloodlines, but by ceremony, an empire that claimed restraint, a rule that wished to appear humble before the sea and sky. In forgotten corners of the earth, laws were once carved into stone, because stone felt eternal. Words written on papyrus can burn, words spoken can distort, but stone seems to promise that truth will not move. And so, it is said, the laws of Atlantis were engraved into pillars, tall enough to hold a ceiling of darkness. We drift through a hall of these pillars now. Their faces are dense with chisel marks, glyphs like stitched scars, spirals repeating like a prayer, star charts embedded near the tops, as if law and cosmos were meant to align. Dust floats in the air, like a slow snowfall of ages. And at the far end, a sealed vault waits behind an archway. Stone door, bronze locks, wax seals pressed with star marks. Knowledge kept behind gates, law kept behind silence, as if truth must be rationed, even to those who rule. Marked by the moon, another scene gathers. An exterior courtyard beneath open sky. A circle of oath stones surrounds a shallow basin. A ceremonial cup rests on an altar. The air is cold, clean, and still, as though the night is listening. It is said that oaths were taken here, not with shouting crowds, not with spectacle, but with gravity. Blood offered not as violence, but as solemn currency. A small, sacred measure, meant to bind the promise to the body. A few dark stains on stone, a folded linen cloth, a blade laid beside bronze cups, that catch the moonlight and return it in softened copper hues. Whispers tell us this was the ritual that held the kings together. 10 rulers, 10 thrones, bound by law and blood, under the witness of stars. At first, the story invites admiration, because there is something calming in the idea of restraint. An empire that does not boast, that does not declare itself divine, but kneels before ceremony, as if ceremony could prevent corruption. And yet, slowly, unease arrives, not as fear, but as a faint shifting of air. Because law, too, can become a mask, a polished surface, behind which dominance hides quietly. Order can become obsession. Restraint can become control. The circle of thrones, meant to balance power, can also trap it, turning governance into a wheel that spins endlessly around itself, until the rulers no longer serve the law, and the law serves the rulers. This is the sacred tension that hums beneath the chapter, the desire to keep order, and the temptation to become order itself. Contradiction glimmers here, like firelight reflected in still water. Atlantis is portrayed as disciplined, and yet destined to fall, as if perfection was always threaded with collapse, as if the very tightness of the system contained the seed of its breaking. In one chamber, the air is so still, it feels like a held breath. A stone tablet rests on a pedestal, its surface carved with lines that could be law, or could be prayer. The lamp above it burns low. Dust hangs motionless, and in that motionlessness, you can almost feel the danger. When rules become too perfect, the heart can begin to forget why they were written, not to glorify power, but to protect the fragile human spirit from the intoxication of command. It is said that cities can be preserved by laws, walls can be defended, harvests can be measured, trade can be controlled, oaths can be sworn, but the heart is harder to keep, because the heart does not obey stone. It obeys longing, it obeys pride, it obeys the quiet hunger to be more than mortal. And when the heart begins to forget its first vow, the most carefully carved laws become only inscriptions, beautiful, enduring, and empty. We return to the circle of thrones one last time. The quiet fire at the center breathes softly, its glow gentle, its warmth fading toward ash. Somewhere nearby, an oath stone lies toppled, half buried in dust, its star mark worn away by time's patient hand. Perhaps it was never meant to last forever. Perhaps no vow can remain pure unless it is remembered as living breath, not only as carved stone. Beneath the silence, the chamber darkens, the fire lowers, the shadows stretch, and the laws, those laws written in quiet fire, remain, not as a conclusion, but as a lingering question, held between the stars and the sea. Can order preserve a city if the soul forgets why it once chose humility? Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, as sleep approaches, the answer does not arrive. Only the hush of the circle and the last soft breath of the flame. It is said that the fall of a great city does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes like water, quiet, patient, so slow that those within it do not notice their feet are getting wet. Tonight, we enter a banquet hall, where laughter is present only as an echo, distant and softened, as if heard through water. The long tables remain, their surfaces carved with spirals, their edges traced with old star marks. But no hands rest upon them now. No voices rise in clear song. Only a faint sense that celebration once lived here, and has since drifted away. Like smoke from a candle, the candles burn lower than they once did. Their flames are small, careful, as if the air has become heavy, and does not wish to be disturbed. Gold clings to the walls and plated panels, yet the glow feels different now. Heavier, less holy, like adornment without meaning. Whispers tell us this is where the turning began, not in war, not in sudden betrayal, but in the slow shift of spirit. When reverent balance begins to lean toward pride, it is difficult to describe pride. When it first arrives, it does not enter with sharp edges. It enters like comfort, a softer chair, a fuller cup, a longer pause before gratitude, a choice so small, it does not feel like a choice at all. Beneath the silence, we sense the moment, Atlantis at the point where it begins to love its own reflection, more than the sea that once humbled it. A mirror stands in a side chamber, its bronze frame engraved with spirals, as if meant to hold the shape of the cosmos. But when the candlelight touches it, it reflects only wealth, coins stacked like offerings, plated walls, glittering objects arranged for admiration. No faces, no eyes, only the bright surface of possession, staring back without warmth. Nearby, a crown rests on a stone pedestal. It is ornate, star-marked, crafted with a precision that once might have felt sacred, yet something in its shape suggests constriction, as though it was built to hold authority, so tightly that the head beneath it would eventually forget how to breathe. It is said that in the beginning, Atlantis carried itself like a vow, disciplined, ceremonial, mindful of the sea. But vows are delicate things. They require remembering, and forgetting does not happen all at once. It happens the way sand gathers in a hidden hourglass, grain by grain, choice by choice. A temple threshold, once bare and clean, becomes adorned with more gold than prayer. An offering basin once filled with clear water begins to taste faintly of iron, not enough to alarm, only enough to suggest that something beneath the surface is changing. We do not rush toward downfall. We watch it gather. The chapter moves with meditative inevitability, as if we are watching a tide approach a shore at night, slowly, without anger, without announcement. A corridor within the city lies quiet, its mosaic floor marked with spirals and star patterns meant to align with heaven. But shallow water now creeps across it, reflecting candlelight in wavering lines. A thin waterline reaches a spiral engraving and holds there, as if pausing to listen. In forgotten corners of the earth, people have always known that water is patient. It does not argue with stone. It simply returns, again and again, until stone gives way. So it is with small corruptions. So it is with pride. So it is with comfort that becomes entitlement. Contradiction deepens softly, like a shadow stretching at dusk. If Atlantis was born of divine favor, how could it drift into ruin? How does a city blessed by sea and sky begin to forget the very forces that lifted it? Some believe the fall was punishment, a stern correction from powers that do not tolerate arrogance. Some believe it was a natural law, that everything built must eventually return to what it rose from. But the deeper mystery is spiritual and quieter than both. Perhaps the fall came because the city forgot what once made it luminous. Not its gold, not its towers, not its rings of water and stone, but its humility, its careful listening, its reverence for the unknown. The emotional movement here is tender, not accusing, because forgetting is human, because comfort is seductive, because even sacred things can become routine when repeated long enough, and routine can become carelessness without ever meaning to. We return to the banquet hall. The candles are nearly gone now, their flames small and wavering. The gold on the walls reflects less light, as if it is growing tired of being admired. In the dark corner of the chamber, a single thread lies across the stone floor, pale, fine, almost invisible, until moonlight touches it. It stretches from one shadowed doorway to another, as if connecting two moments in time, the moment of reverence and the moment of forgetting. Whispers tell us that collapse often begins, not with thunder, but with a subtle loosening of the soul. A single thread in the dark, pulled gently, almost kindly, until the weave begins to shift. Perhaps it was never meant to be stopped. Perhaps it was never meant to be seen. Perhaps it was only meant to be felt. In the quiet hours, when the mind grows soft, and the world fades to hush, some voices only echo, when we are ready to listen. And tonight, as the thread turns, the candles dim, leaving us suspended between what Atlantis was and what it began to become, as the tide continues its patient approach, without conclusion and without sound. It is said that before the world changes, there is a moment when everything becomes too quiet. Tonight begins with that unnatural stillness, a shoreline without wind, No rustle in the reeds. No birds cutting the sky with wings. Even the waves seemed to hesitate. Their usual language softened into a hush too careful to disturb. Marked by the moon, the water lies smooth, not peaceful, but waiting. The horizon holds its breath beneath a pale light, and fog gathers as if the sea is drawing a veil over what is about to be taken. Whispers tell us that those who live near the ocean learn to sense such moments, not with logic, but with the body. The way skin feels pressure before a storm. The way animals grow still when the earth becomes uneasy beneath them. Beneath the silence, the ground seems to listen. And then, not loudly, not violently, the world shudders. It is a slow tremor, like an animal turning in sleep. Hairline cracks appear in stone. Pebbles tumble from a cliff edge, with the small, soft sound of something exhaling. Nothing dramatic yet. Nothing that would make a person shout. Only the subtle message that the earth is moving its weight from one ancient foot to another. Some believe this was how it began for Atlantis, not with a scream, but with a sigh. The focus here is the cataclysm, not as spectacle, but as sacred, slow horror, a great turning, in which the ocean reclaims what it once cradled. The chapter remains calm, as though narrated through a dream, where fear is muffled by water and distance. Because in dreams, even disaster arrives softly, the mind refusing sharp edges. As sleep approaches, we move through the city in glimpses, gentle and vivid. A temple corridor at night, oil lamps trembling in their bowls, their flames thin and uncertain. One lamp tips, not knocked by a rushing crowd. There are no crowds, but as if the floor itself has become slightly unfamiliar. The oil spills in a slow, dark ribbon. Light pours sideways across stone, stretching shadows into long, silent shapes. A doorway stands half open. Inside it, darkness gathers, like a mouth that does not speak. Temple doors, once proud and heavy, seem to swallow the last warmth of the lamps, without resistance. Outside, the canals change their voice. Water that once flowed forward begins to pull backward, not with rage, with authority, as if the sea has called its own water home, and the channels obey. The surface inverts. Reflections tremble. Stone edges are exposed, where water had always rested, and in the distance, foam begins to appear. Not a wild storm foam, but a pale, persistent crest, climbing the city's edges, as if the ocean is rising, in a slow, ceremonial procession. Here, history and symbol braid together, because this is not only an event, it is a statement. The sea rising not with anger, but with ancient certainty. The earth shuddering not as punishment, but as inevitability, a reminder that all things built on shifting ground are borrowed. Contradiction lingers like mist. Some accounts speak of a single terrible day and night, as if an empire vanished in one breath, and yet the mind resists. How can a city of rings and temples, a civilization plated in red gold light, disappear so swiftly? So we let certainty erode gently, as waves erode stone. Was it one night, or was it a season of unraveling, remembered as one? Because memory prefers simplicity. When pain is too large, perhaps the one night is a vessel the mind created to hold the unholdable. A single dark page in the book of time, easier to turn than a long chapter of slow collapse. We drift again through images, softly, without harshness. A statue in a coastal plaza, its star marks worn by salt. Foam climbs over its feet, then its knees, then its shoulders. The face disappears last, not in panic, but in quiet surrender, because the sea does not destroy with malice. It simply closes the gate. This is the emotional turning, not terror, but surrender, the realization that the ocean, like time, does not hate what it takes. It takes because it can, because it always has. Because what rises from water may also return to water, when the world's unseen threads are pulled. And then, silence after the flood, a smooth surface where a city once breathed. No roofs, no pillars, no plated walls, only moonlight trembling on water, like a fragile reflection, trying to remember. what it once touched. Where memory fades, the mind reaches downward, searching. What remains below? Stone, ruin, broken statues and silt, or only story, a name held in the mouth of time, because nothing else survived? Whispers tell us the sea is an archive, without shelves. It keeps what it keeps, in darkness and pressure, in cold chambers beneath the waves. And perhaps Atlantis rests there still, not as proof, but as presence, a submerged geometry, felt but not seen. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to become the kind of mystery that can only be approached in soft hours like these, when the world is quiet and the mind is willing to accept the sacred unknown. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, after the sea remembered, the water lies calm again, as if nothing happened, except for the faint ache of not knowing what sleeps beneath the moonlit surface. It is said that after a great swallowing, the sea grows quiet, not as apology, not as mourning, but as if it has already closed the gate and turned its face away. At dawn, a small boat drifts on gray-blue water, moving without hurry, moving as though it no longer belongs to any map. Around it, scattered debris floats like broken sentences, splintered planks, shards of pottery, a torn strip of cloth that flutters once and then lies still. The horizon ahead does not answer. Fog rests there like a veil, soft and luminous, hiding whatever shore might exist. Beyond the survivors' reach, we do not see the survivors clearly. This chapter is not about faces. It is about the afterimage of Atlantis, those who may have remained, when the rings of water and stone were taken, marked by the moon. Their hair would have been stiff with salt, their skin chilled by night water, their eyes filled with a silence too heavy to speak. Beneath the silence, the boat carries small relics, not treasures, but fragments. A salt-crusted amulet rests on damp cloth, its faded copper surface etched with spirals and star marks. It was not saved for its value. It was saved because it remembers. A comb lies nearby, crusted with white salt crystals, as though the sea tried to claim even the most intimate tools of ordinary life. A single carved stone fragment, small enough to hold in the hands, is wrapped in linen. Later, on land, it will be used as a pillow, not because it is comfortable, but because its weight is familiar, and familiarity becomes a kind of shelter when everything else is strange. Whispers tell us that exile begins this way, not with a declaration, but with drift. A boat that should have returned to a harbor instead becomes a wandering thought. A people who once belonged to rings and rituals now belong only to the sea's slow currents and the uncertain mercy of dawn. The survivors stare toward the horizon that does not answer and carry something heavier than salt. They carry the knowledge that they may be the last witnesses, and that is a soft grief, not sharp, not loud, but steady, like the ache of cold water long after you have stepped out. Some believe that if survivors existed, they would have preserved clearer proof. A tablet, a map, a monument, something undeniable. But contradiction becomes intimate here, because trauma does not preserve things neatly. In forgotten corners of the earth, disaster breaks more than buildings. It breaks language. How do you describe a city that vanished beneath moonlight? How do you tell a listener that canal surged backward, that temple door swallowed darkness, that statues disappeared beneath foam, as calmly as stones falling into deep water? The mouth tries to shape the words, and the words collapse. The mind reaches for clarity and finds only fragments. So testimony becomes legend, not because people choose to lie, but because listeners cannot bear the full weight of truth. A story too heavy must be softened to be carried, and so the survivors may have spoken in symbols. A lullaby sung to keep children calm, its melody simple, its tone gentle, yet hidden inside the song, like a secret tucked under a tongue. Our coordinates disguised as prayer, star names woven into the verses, directions slipped between blessings. Not go west, but follow the star that sinks into the sea. not beyond the pillars. But where memory fades, the gate remains. Whispers tell us that many sacred songs began as survival codes, a way to keep a path alive, when writing could be lost, and when speaking plainly would invite disbelief or danger. We drift now into other lands, other tongues. The survivors step onto unfamiliar sand, their boat pulled up like a tired animal, seeking rest. The shore is pale, its dunes quiet. They build no great monuments. They do not carve their loss into towering stone. They make a small shrine instead, a simple stele, etched with spirals, and a bowl of salt placed before it. As offering, the amulet is set there some nights, its surface catching torchlight, its star marks glowing faintly, like a memory that refuses to extinguish. Nearby, cracked clay tablets dry in the air, their inscriptions smeared by seawater, as if the ocean touched the words and softened them into ambiguity. This is the fragility of proof. The sea does not only swallow cities, it swallows certainty. And yet, the survivors carry something else. Quiet resolve. Not the resolve to conquer, not the resolve to rebuild the same empire, but the resolve to remember, to keep the name alive, even if the shape is lost, to let the story change like clouds, and still remain true at its core, because remembering is not the same as returning. The ache remains. The rings do not rise again. The temple does not appear on the horizon. Only the ocean behind them, calm and indifferent, as if it has already swallowed the final evidence and moved on. Perhaps it was never meant to be proven. Perhaps it was meant to survive, a story wrapped in sea salt and breath. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the survivors step farther onto unfamiliar sand, the boat creaks softly in the shallows. The amulet glints once in the dawn light, and the sea keeps its silence, holding Atlantis beneath its smooth surface, as though the lost city has become a secret the world can only dream. It is said that some truths do not travel in straight lines. They travel as echoes. Tonight, we begin with scattered mirrors. A ruined wall stands on one shore, salt-stained and broken, its stones carved with spirals, rings within rings, as if an ancient hand tried to capture the shape of water, before water could erase it. Across a narrow stretch of misted sea, another shoreline waits, and on it another ruin. Different stone, different age, yet the same motif returns. Not identical, not proof, but a rhyme. A distant bell heard through fog, answering another bell, in a language older than certainty. Whispers tell us this is how Atlantis lives now, not in a single location, but in reflections that appear, wherever humans have stood too close to the tide, and asked to see, to behave. Beneath the silence, we become pilgrims, not pilgrims seeking a shrine that can be photographed and measured, but pilgrims of resemblance, walking slowly through the world's memory, as it repeats itself. We drift past shores where people still speak softly, of bright kingdoms swallowed overnight. Their stories change with each telling, as stories must, yet the core remains strangely familiar. A city that shone, a warning ignored, a night when the sea rose, not in rage, but in judgment that did not require words. In forgotten corners of the earth, temples hold watermarks on stone, as if they are scripture, lines etched into walls, each line marking a height the ocean once reached, each line accompanied by a small spiral symbol, as though the sea signed its work, and the people chose not to erase the signature. We stand in such corridors now. The air is cool and still. Dust hangs in torchlight, like suspended breath. Our fingers do not touch the waterlines, yet we feel their meaning. Here is the reminder. That land is not a guarantee. Here is the quiet record that what was built can be taken. We continue our slow pilgrimage, not to one sea, but to many. In one place, the ocean is dark green blue, and beneath it, broken archways lie half buried in silt. We do not see the whole city, only hints, a ring of stone, a statue fragment, a star mark softened by time. Light shafts fall through water like thin blessings, and the dust drifts slowly, as if the sea is keeping its own incense. In another place, an island rises from fog at dawn, its cliffs shaped like a sleeping creature. At its peak, faint ruins catch the first pale gold of morning, and then vanish again, as mist closes the veil. Whispers tell us people here speak of a sacred island that is never fully found, only glimpsed, a place that appears when the heart is quiet, then disappears when the mind tries to seize it. And everywhere we go, the same contradiction remains central and soothing. The echoes are everywhere, yet the original voice remains hidden. It is like walking through a hall of mirrors, where each reflection suggests a single face, and yet that face never turns toward us directly. So the question changes. Not where is Atlantis, but what is Atlantis? Is it one place, one empire, one night when the sea remembered? Or is it an archetype, a pattern born whenever humans build too high, too bright, too close to water, and forget that the tide has its own law? Some believe Atlantis is the story we tell when we sense the ocean's patience and fear our own impatience. Some believe it is the name we give to every civilization that mistakes its shine for immortality. Symbolism gathers gently as we drift. A spiral shell rests on a stone altar, used as an oracle, not because it predicts the future, but because when held to the ear, it repeats a sea we cannot touch. A shallow bowl of water beside it holds torchlight reflections, like trapped constellations, stars under the surface, as if the sky has been lowered to meet the ocean's gaze. A map table carved into stone shows coastlines in careful detail, until suddenly it stops. One blank space is left intentionally unfilled, marked only with a spiral glyph. Not ignorance, but restraint. A cartographer admitting, in quiet humility, that not all places are meant to be owned by ink. And on a lonely shore, driftwood lies on wet sand. A name is scratched into it, by a hand we do not see, and a candle stub flickers nearby, protected from wind in a small hollow. The flame bends, then steadies, as if it is trying to keep the name alive. For one more night, the emotional arc moves slowly now, from searching to acceptance, because perhaps the purpose of echoes is not to lead us to a single answer. Perhaps echoes are sacred, precisely because they remain incomplete. They remind us that the world is larger than proof, and that mystery can be a kind of mercy. Marked by the moon, the sea continues to speak, in waves that repeat endlessly. In, out, as if reciting a litany of forgotten cities, some named, most unnamed, a prayer spoken in water, for everything that has been taken. And Atlantis may simply be the one we learn to call by name. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to endure as echo, a gentle bell heard through fog, guiding us not to certainty, but to humility, as the waves repeat their endless hymn, and the night carries us closer to sleep. It is said that the ocean knows how to keep a secret, not with locks, not with guards, not with walls of stone, but with depth. Tonight, we stand before the present sea at night, calm, black, and vast, holding its silence, like a sealed book. The moon hangs pale above it, and the surface takes on the color of ink, smooth enough to reflect starlight, and yet restless enough to break that reflection into trembling fragments. Beneath the silence, the waves arrive softly and retreat softly, as if even the shoreline has learned to speak in whispers. This is the final mystery, not the discovery of Atlantis, not the argument of scholars, not the bright hunger for proof, but the enduring refusal of the ocean to give it back. Whispers tell us that water is gentle, and it is. It smooths the hard world. It polishes stone. It carries seeds. It sings against the shore, until cliffs become sand. But gentleness can also conceal. There's a quiet cruelty in the way the sea hides what it takes, not by guarding it fiercely, but by erasing its edges, until nothing sharp remains to catch the mind. Some believe that beneath the surface, ruins still wait, Columns laid down like sleeping bones, arches half buried in silt, a ring of stone, softened by time, until its inscriptions feel like shallow breaths, rather than carved declarations. Salt gathers on every surface, like pale frost. Silt settles, grain by grain, as patiently as sleep. And what was once a city becomes a shape in darkness that no hand can reach. Depth becomes a veil that time cannot lift. This is how the sea refuses, not by shouting no, but by turning everything into quiet. In forgotten corners of the earth, people have found shipwrecks and sunken temples, statues caught in algae, stones rounded by currents, and they have learned a lesson, older than any map. The ocean does not return what it has fully claimed, not because it hates, because its nature is to close, to cover, to smooth the world, until questions become softer. Here, contradictions are allowed to rest. Perhaps Atlantis was real, a city of rings and ritual, a temple under starlight, walls plated in red gold breath. Perhaps it was a warning shaped like a dream, a story made luminous, so the lesson would survive, even if the place did not. Perhaps it was both at once, a true memory, woven into symbol, so it could travel farther than proof. The chapter does not struggle against these possibilities. It lets them float, like lanterns on dark water, each light valid in its own way, because the sea itself does not debate. It simply breathes. In, out, and as we listen, symbols return, softened, distant, like gentle apparitions, drifting through the mind's chamber. A gate seen again, two weathered pillars, emerging from shallow water, moonlight outlining them, as if the world still remembers. The threshold beyond which maps once went blank. A scroll remembered, unfurled under a trembling lamp. Ink faded, spirals and waves, still murmuring their ancient rhythm. A temple recalled, not found on any shore, yet rising in reflection, for a moment on moving water, as if the sea is dreaming, and the dream is almost visible. And the rings, the strange ceremonial geometry, appearing as faint concentric ripples on a calm surface, circles that form and dissolve, without explanation. It is said that humans seek answers, because answers feel like shelter. But some mysteries are older than shelter. Some mysteries are meant to remain half-seen, like starlight on moving water, beautiful precisely because it cannot be held. The ocean's refusal becomes a kind of teaching, a reminder that not everything is meant to be extracted. Not everything is meant to be possessed. Some stories are meant to remain sacred, in their hidden dark, where they can continue to work on us quietly, softening pride, awakening humility, turning the mind toward wonder. Perhaps the refusal is not emptiness. Perhaps it is protection. Protection from the careless hands of certainty. Protection from a hunger that would strip the myth of its meaning and leave only stones. When we listen closely to the hush of waves, we may hear not an answer, but invitation. An invitation to accept that some truths remain veiled so they can stay alive. An invitation to let Atlantis be what it has become, not a destination, but a sacred echo. And tonight, as the sea continues its slow breathing, the moonlight trembles on the black surface, and the last questions soften into something gentler. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in the ocean's refusal to return the city, we are offered one final blessing: to sleep, to wonder, and to let the lost kingdom remain quietly sacred beneath the waves.